Bass Reeves was born in a small coastal town in the southern United States in the early 1980s, a place defined by the rhythm of the ocean and the slow, persistent pace of life along the shore. His family lived modestly. His father, a shipyard mechanic, spent long days repairing vessels and teaching Bass the value of precision and hard work, while his mother, a dedicated nurse at the local clinic, instilled in him compassion and the quiet strength required to face life's inevitable hardships. From a young age, Bass absorbed lessons of responsibility and resilience, developing a sense of purpose that would guide him throughout his life. As he grew older, Bass became deeply aware of the struggles and injustices surrounding him. He observed the hardships of working-class families, the corruption quietly embedded in local institutions, and the silent suffering of those who had no voice. Rather than reacting impulsively, he studied, listened, and planned. By his 20s, he had carved a path for himself as a quiet force of order and justice in his community, often working behind the scenes to protect the vulnerable. He believed in action over recognition, in impact over fame. Many never knew his name, but countless lives were touched by his interventions, whether it was resolving disputes fairly, preventing exploitation, or ensuring that those in need received the help they were too proud or afraid to ask for. Bass' commitment was evident in small, deliberate actions. He once uncovered a local scam that was draining funds from a charity supporting children in need. Rather than confront the perpetrators publicly, he meticulously gathered evidence and coordinated with authorities to stop the operation quietly, ensuring the funds were returned without creating a scandal. On another occasion, he spent weeks helping a struggling single mother avoid eviction, negotiating with landlords and organizing community support, all without seeking recognition or reward. These acts were a reflection of his deep sense of responsibility and his quiet determination to make the world a better place, one life at a time. Bass Reeves was a man of profound introspection. In his personal life, he avoided unnecessary attention, preferring solitude and reflection. He would often take long walks along the shoreline, letting the waves and the wind clear his mind, or sit for hours in quiet corners of old libraries, absorbing the wisdom of books whose pages smelled of history. These moments of calm were not indulgences but necessary periods of preparation, where he could consider the consequences of his actions and plan his next steps with clarity. Despite his reclusive tendencies, he formed deep and lasting relationships with a select few, who valued his honesty, integrity, and unwavering loyalty above all else. His daily existence was disciplined yet simple. He maintained a routine that balanced physical endurance with mental acuity. Early mornings spent walking or running along deserted beaches, followed by hours of meticulous planning and correspondence to ensure his initiatives were effective. Even in leisure, his choices reflected purpose. Classical literature, journals filled with observations, and quiet moments of contemplation. He rarely sought recognition, yet his presence commanded respect. Those who encountered him sensed an uncommon depth, a rare combination of serenity, determination, and moral clarity. Bass Reeves passed away in his late 40s after a private struggle with a chronic illness he bore with extraordinary courage. He faced his decline with the same quiet dignity that had defined his entire life, refusing to let suffering diminish his principles or overshadow the legacy he had built. His death was not marked by public ceremonies or grand tributes, yet the ripples of his life extended far beyond what most could see. Friends, neighbors, and those he had aided quietly mourned a man who had lived with intention, compassion, and unwavering strength. His legacy endured as a testament to the impact one individual can have when guided by integrity, reflection, and a steadfast commitment to the well-being of others. Even after his passing, the lessons of his life continued to influence those who knew him. Stories of his interventions, the subtle ways he corrected injustice, and the moments of quiet kindness he offered became part of the local lore. Bass Reeves remained, in essence, a figure larger than life, not for his fame or wealth, but for the extraordinary quiet force of character he embodied, a man who lived and died as he had always intended, with purpose, calm, and unshakable resolve. The Pinkerton organization had long been shrouded in myth, but in the modern era, it had evolved into a private army for the world's ultra-wealthy. Operating from a discreet compound in the American Midwest, it was no ordinary security firm. Its operatives were a blend of elite soldiers, intelligence analysts, and cyber specialists, trained to anticipate and neutralize threats with surgical precision. Their clients were billionaires and global power players who demanded not only protection from physical danger but also from political sabotage, corporate espionage, and reputational attacks. Each operation was tailored. Evacuations were planned to the last second, hostile networks infiltrated silently, and potential threats eliminated before they fully emerged. Discretion was paramount. The world rarely saw the organization at work, but its effects were everywhere. Scenes of action were as calculated as they were intense. In one instance, Pinkerton operatives intercepted a cyber attack on a tech billionaire's assets, tracing it across 3 continents and neutralizing it before any damage occurred. Another time, a hostile corporate takeover was quietly dismantled through targeted intelligence, leaving the rivals unaware of the invisible hand that had shifted the balance. On the ground, teams conducted rapid extraction drills, moving clients out of danger zones through hidden routes, blending into crowds, and disappearing without a trace. Despite their efficiency, the organization operated under strict codes of loyalty and ethical precision. Collateral damage was unacceptable. Every action was carefully measured, even in morally gray scenarios. Leaders spent hours reviewing intelligence and mentoring operatives, ensuring the legacy of reliability and discretion remained unbroken. The Pinkertons were invisible but omnipresent, a shadowy force that combined wealth, strategy, and discipline. They ensured the world's most powerful individuals stayed untouchable, executing operations that felt like scenes from a high-stakes thriller, yet leaving almost no trace behind. Charley Parkhurst, born in the early 19th century in New England, became one of the most legendary figures of the American West. Throughout her adult life, Charley concealed her true identity, living and working as a man. She was a renowned stagecoach driver, a dangerous and demanding profession, and earned the respect of colleagues and passengers alike for her exceptional skill, courage, and unwavering composure. Everyone who met Charley believed she was a man. She drove horses and stagecoaches along treacherous mountain roads in California, bravely escorting passengers through bandit ambushes and unpredictable weather. Her peers admired her toughness and reliability, never suspecting that beneath the rough exterior was a woman who had defied every expectation of her time. Her deception became a nationwide sensation after her death in 1879. When friends prepared her body for burial, they discovered that Charley had been a woman. Suddenly, the reputation of a fearless, skilled stagecoach driver transformed into the legend of a woman who had spent her entire life concealing her true identity. This revelation made her name famous not only in the West but across the country. Despite this hidden identity, Charley was honest and principled in her work. She rescued passengers from dangerous situations, protected valuable cargo, and performed her duties flawlessly. Her life demonstrated that bravery, skill, and determination are not determined by gender, and that the ability to keep a secret can be as powerful as physical courage. Today, Charley Parkhurst is celebrated as a symbol of independence, daring, and hidden strength. Her story of how she fooled the entire West continues to inspire generations, reminding us that the world often sees only what it is shown, while true heroes live and act in ways that leave behind a legend. William Frederick Buffalo Bill Cody was born on February 26, 1846, near Eau Claire in Scott County, Iowa. From a young age, he worked with horses and livestock to help support his family, and as a teenager he became associated with frontier life, including riding for the Pony Express delivering mail across the plains. During the American Civil War, he served as a Union Scout and later worked as a civilian scout for the U.S. Army. In his work with the Army, he participated in conflicts against Native American tribes during the Indian Wars, at times engaging in battle with groups such as Cheyenne and Sioux warriors, and gaining a reputation as an Indian fighter, a title that would follow him throughout his life. His exploits were widely publicized and helped to fuel his early fame. After the war, Cody became known for hunting buffalo to feed workers building the Union Pacific Railroad, and in a relatively short time he killed thousands of buffalo, earning the nickname Buffalo Bill. While he was not the sole cause of the mass slaughter of bison on the plains, his actions reflected a broader trend at the time that devastated the species and deeply harmed the way of life for many Native American tribes who depended on buffalo for sustenance. In 1883, Cody founded Buffalo Bill's Wild West, a traveling stage show that dramatized life on the frontier, blending real and fictional scenes of cowboy skills, stagecoach chases, buffalo hunts, and battles with Native Americans. The show became enormously popular in the United States and Europe, featuring markswoman Annie Oakley and, at times, Native American performers including Chief Sitting Bull. Cody presented reenactments of frontier battles and attacks on settlers, often emphasizing the image of Native Americans as aggressors and white cowboys as heroes. These dramatic portrayals reinforced stereotypes and a simplified narrative of white supremacy and conquest, shaping audiences' perceptions of the West in ways that were historically misleading and harmful. Many Native Americans participated in the Wild West show because it offered pay, travel opportunities, and a chance to leave reservations and see parts of the world they otherwise could not. Some found it a rare economic opportunity during a period when government policies actively suppressed indigenous cultures. Nevertheless, the show's staged attacks and conflict scenes perpetuated the idea that native peoples were a threat to civilization, contributing to popular myths that obscured the realities of broken treaties, forced displacement, and cultural loss experienced by indigenous nations. Buffalo Bill continued to perform with his Wild West show for decades, becoming one of the first global celebrities from the United States and spreading his version of frontier history to millions. While he was celebrated in his time and later remembered as a pioneering entertainer, his legacy remains deeply complex. He is seen both as a symbol of American frontier spirit and as someone whose portrayal of Native Americans and frontier conflict contributed to long-lasting misconceptions and cultural exploitation. Cody died on January 10, 1917, in Denver, Colorado, leaving behind a powerful but controversial legacy that continues to shape how the American West is remembered. Myra Maybelle Shirley, better known to history as Belle Starr, was born on February 5, 1848, near Carthage, Missouri, into a family of farmers and business owners. She grew up receiving a decent education for the time and learned to ride horses and handle firearms, skills that would later fuel her infamous reputation on the American frontier. The outbreak of the Civil War devastated her family's life, and after her elder brother was killed and their home was burned, the Shirleys moved to Texas in search of a fresh start. It was there that Belle became acquainted with men whose lives were shaped by rebellion and lawlessness. In Texas, Belle married outlaw Jim Reed in 1866, a member of a criminal world intertwined with some of the most notorious gangs of the era, such as the James Younger Gang. Rumors even linked her to members like Cole Younger, though historical records are unclear on exact details. Together, Belle and Reed rode across Texas and Oklahoma Territory, stealing cattle, horses, and goods, living a life on the run from the law. While the extent of her direct involvement in all crimes remains debated by historians, she was widely associated with rustling, theft, and the criminal networks of the time. After Reed was killed in a gunfight in 1874, Belle did not retreat from the outlaw life. She eventually married Sam Starr, a Cherokee outlaw, in 1880, and the couple settled on a ranch near the Canadian River in what is now Oklahoma. Their home, known as Younger's Bend, became a notorious hideout for criminals and outlaws, including Jesse James, who sometimes stayed there. From this base, Belle and Sam engaged in rustling horses, bootlegging whiskey, and helping fugitives evade justice. Belle's flair for dramatic dress, riding side saddle in velvet or buckskin with pistols at her hips, and her bold connections with outlaws contributed to her growing notoriety as the so-called Bandit Queen. In 1883, Belle and Sam were caught and convicted of horse theft, one of the most common outlaw crimes of the era, and each served 9 months in the federal penitentiary in Detroit, Michigan. Despite this imprisonment, they quickly returned to their lawless ways upon release, continuing to steal horses and provide refuge to criminals passing through Indian Territory. They were arrested several more times on various charges, including accusations of robbery, but often avoided conviction due to lack of evidence and Belle's own charm and connections. Bearing her legend even further, newspapers and dime novels sensationalized Belle's life, casting her as a female Robin Hood and likening her to male outlaws such as Jesse James. One popular publication, Belle Starr, the Bandit Queen, or the female Jesse James, helped cement her image as the quintessential outlaw woman of the Old West, even if many of the details were exaggerated or invented for dramatic effect. Tragically, Belle Starr's life ended violently on February 3, 1889, just 2 days before her 41st birthday. While returning alone to her ranch from a trip, she was ambushed and shot in the back by an unknown assailant. The identity of her killer was never definitively discovered, and suspects ranged from a bitter neighbor to even members of her own family. Her murder remains an unsolved mystery to this day, adding a haunting end to her dramatic life. Although historians now recognize that her actual criminal record was likely less extensive than the legends suggest, her sole serious conviction being horse theft, Belle Starr's life and mysterious death elevated her into American folklore as the Bandit Queen of the Wild West. Her story continues to capture imaginations as a blend of real outlaw life, frontier adventure, and dramatic myth-making from an era when the West was still wild and barely governed. The Reno brothers were a group of American outlaws whose name became infamous in the years following the Civil War for carrying out the first peacetime train robbery in United States history. They came from Jackson County, Indiana, where their gang had been involved in robbery, arson, and violence in the chaotic years after the war. The Reno gang was made up primarily of brothers John, Frank, Simeon, and William Reno, and they terrorized the region with a series of crimes that would forever change the nature of outlawry in the American Midwest. On the evening of October 6, 1866, John and Simeon Reno, with an associate named Frank Sparks, boarded an eastbound Ohio and Mississippi Railroad passenger train near Seymour, Indiana. Wearing masks, the men forced their way into the express car and held guns on the messenger, demanding the keys to the safes. The messenger only had access to one safe, which they emptied of cash and gold estimated at around $10,000, $13,000, and they threw the larger safe off the moving train, planning to return to it later. After pulling the emergency cord and stopping the train, the gang jumped off and escaped into the night, leaving the engineer and passengers unaware of what had happened until the train rolled on. This was a completely new type of crime. Robbing a moving train in a remote area, far from stations or law enforcement. Before this, trains had been burglarized while stopped at depots or freight yards, but the Reno brothers were the first to halt a moving train specifically to rob it, and this bold tactic quickly spread to other outlaws and regions, especially as railways expanded across the West. Trains often carried large sums of cash, valuables, and precious metals linked to the booming Western economy, making them tempting targets for criminals inspired by the Reno's example. The Reno brothers didn't stop at one robbery. Over the next couple of years, their gang carried out several more crimes, including another train robbery near Marshfield, Indiana in May 1868, where they reportedly made off with up to $96,000 after overpowering the train crew and breaking into an express car. Their violent methods included beating guards and forcing trains to stop in isolated spots where they could work without interference. Their spree of robberies and violent acts eventually provoked a strong reaction. Railroads hired Pinkerton detectives to pursue them, and a local vigilante movement grew in response to the gang's terror. In 1868, several members of the Reno gang were captured, and Frank, William, and Simeon Reno were dragged from jail and hanged by vigilantes in Indiana, while John was imprisoned after earlier crimes. Their loot and many details of their activities remain partly mysterious, but their name became legendary, and their tactics laid the groundwork for later train robbers like Jesse James and Butch Cassidy's Wild Bunch. Despite their short career, the Reno brothers' daring attacks on moving trains marked a turning point in criminal history, introducing a new kind of outlaw enterprise on the rails and earning them a fearsome reputation that would be remembered long after their violent end. One of the last real gunfights of the American Old West occurred near the small frontier town of Gleason, Arizona, on March 5, 1917. This event, known as the Gleason gunfight, took place long after the iconic shootouts of the 1880s and even into a time when the Old West had mostly faded into history, but lawlessness still lingered in the remote borderlands of the Southwest. At this point in Arizona's history, the state had become dry under prohibition laws that banned the sale and manufacture of alcohol. Cochise County, bordering both wet Mexico and New Mexico, became a major route for smugglers bringing liquor north across the border. The sheriff of Cochise County, Harry C. Wheeler, was a former captain of the Arizona Rangers and a dedicated lawman determined to enforce the ban. Along with his deputy, Leif Gibson, Wheeler patrolled the rugged countryside in search of bootleggers and smugglers. On the night of March 5th, after a long day searching for illegal shipments in the Chiricahua Mountains, Wheeler and Gibson were returning in their car and, exhausted, pulled off to camp beside the railroad tracks about 2 miles east of Gleason. No sooner had they laid down next to the car than a sudden volley of shots rang out from bandits hidden just over 200 yards away. The attackers, believed to be Mexican alcohol smugglers, opened fire in the darkness, immediately shattering the windshield of the lawman's car. Wheeler grabbed a box of ammunition and his rifle, while Gibson pulled his revolver. As they climbed up to the railroad embankment for a better line of sight, they could hear taunts and insults in both Spanish and English from at least 4 gunmen attacking them. For almost an hour, the 2 lawmen and the smugglers traded gunfire, expending well over 100 rounds. At one point, the moonlight made Wheeler and Gibson visible targets, so they lay low behind the tracks and waited for the moon to set before attempting a countermove. When one of the attackers nearly hit Wheeler, the sheriff, already renowned as a champion marksman, raised his rifle and fired multiple shots toward the muzzle flashes, striking one of the attackers. Although the fighting continued, Wheeler's accurate fire forced the assailants back into cover. As night deepened and the moon disappeared, Wheeler and Gibson charged the position only to find it abandoned. The smugglers had fled into the desert, leaving behind 10 cases of confiscated whiskey loaded on burros and horse tracks heading toward the Chiricahua Mountains and likely into Mexico. A large pool of blood and tracks in the sand showed someone had been badly hurt, though no body was ever found. In the days that followed, Wheeler called for reinforcements and attempted to pursue the gang, eventually capturing at least 2 of the smugglers, one identified as Santiago Garcia, who claimed he fired because he mistook the lawmen for rival bootleggers. Other members escaped across the border. The Gleason gunfight stands out as one of the last notable armed confrontations in the classic American frontier style, lawmen and outlaws exchanging gunfire in the open desert long after the frontier had otherwise quieted. Though the era of the legendary gunfight was fading by 1917, this clash showed that in remote corners of the West, the rough and dangerous world of bootleggers and lawmen still persisted even as the world modernized around them. Laura Bullion was a real outlaw of the American Old West and is remembered as the only woman who actively participated in crimes with Butch Cassidy's infamous Wild Bunch gang. Born around 1876 in Knickerbocker, Texas, to a mother of German descent and a father who was himself a bank robber, Bullion grew up surrounded by criminal influences, which helped shape her future path. As a teenager, she moved to San Antonio and worked as a prostitute in Madame Fanny Porter's brothel, a place notorious as a meeting point for some of the West's most dangerous outlaws, including Robert Leroy Butch Cassidy Parker and Harry Alonzo Sundance Kid Longabaugh. It was here that Laura first became involved with members of outlaw circles and began her association with the Wild Bunch. Bullion was romantically linked first with outlaw William News Carver and later with Ben the Tall Texan Kilpatrick, a train and bank robber. As she became closer to Kilpatrick and the gang, she joined the Wild Bunch operations more fully. Within the gang, she became known by several nicknames, including Della Rose, Rose of the Wild Bunch, and later the more striking Thorny Rose of the Wild Bunch, a title that reflected both her loyalty to the crew and her dangerous, sharp-edged persona among hardened criminals. Although Bullion was not known for participating in gunfights or holding off lawmen in the way some male outlaws did, she played an important supportive and logistical role in the gang's criminal activities. She helped the Wild Bunch by selling stolen goods, forging signatures on documents, gathering supplies, and laundering money after robberies. Her ability to disguise herself, often dressing in men's clothing, helped confuse law enforcement on several occasions. Witnesses describing a young male robber may have actually been describing Bullion in disguise. In July 1901, the Wild Bunch carried out the Great Northern Train robbery in Montana, one of the gang's most notorious heists. Later that year, Bullion and Kilpatrick were tracked down by Pinkerton detectives in St. Louis, Missouri. When officers searched her luggage, they found stolen banknotes from the robbery, leading to her arrest on federal charges related to robbery and forgery. She was convicted and sentenced to 5 years in the Missouri State Penitentiary at Jefferson City, but she served about 3 years and 10 months before her release in September 1905. Following her release from prison, Bullion faded from outlaw life. In 1918, she moved to Memphis, Tennessee, adopting the alias Frieda Lincoln and claiming to be a war widow whose husband had died in World War I. She later worked quietly as a seamstress, dressmaker, and interior designer, distancing herself from her past life of crime. Laura Bullion lived out the rest of her days in Memphis, largely forgotten by the public as a notorious outlaw. She died of heart disease on December 2, 1961, and was buried in Memorial Park Cemetery. At the time of her death, she was reportedly the last surviving member linked to Butch Cassidy's Wild Bunch, a living link to the era of frontier outlaws long after the Wild West had become history. Pearl Hart was a Canadian-born outlaw of the American Old West who became famous for committing one of the last recorded stagecoach robberies in the United States, and especially because she was a woman in a crime overwhelmingly dominated by men. She was born Pearl Taylor in 1871 in Lindsay, Ontario, Canada, and later moved to the United States, where she drifted into a life on the frontier. By the late 1890s, Hart was in the Arizona Territory. Living in mining towns such as Globe and working in small jobs like cooking, her finances took a sharp downturn after local mines closed. Around this time, she began a relationship with a drifter known only as Joe Boot, likely an alias. Facing money troubles, and, in her telling, needing funds to visit her seriously ill mother, Hart and Boot decided to rob a stagecoach. On May 30, 1899, Hart and Boot stopped a stagecoach that ran between Globe and Florence, Arizona, at a watering point near Cane Springs Canyon, about 30 miles southeast of Globe. One of the last operating stage runs in the area, it had not been robbed in years and therefore carried no shotgun messenger for protection. Hart cut her hair short and dressed in menswear, carrying a .38 caliber revolver, while Boot was armed with a Colt .45. Together they forced the coach to stop, took about $431.20 and 2 firearms from the passengers. Then, in a strange twist of frontier chivalry, returned $1 to each passenger so they could buy food upon arrival in Florence. Their daring crime, especially because it was carried out by a woman, quickly drew widespread attention. A posse led by the sheriff of Pinal County caught the pair on June 5, 1899, finding Boots sleeping and surrendering quietly while Hart resisted capture. She was jailed in Tucson because the smaller Florence jail lacked facilities for women. The novelty of her crime turned her into a media sensation, and reporters from across the nation came to interview and photograph her, dubbing her the Bandit Queen. Hart even escaped from jail on October 12, 1899, taking advantage of flimsy walls, though she was soon recaptured. At her first trial, she claimed her motives were honorable, that she stole only to help her sick mother, and the jury acquitted her of the robbery charge, astonishing the judge and the public. However, prosecutors quickly rearrested her on federal charges for tampering with U.S. mail, and this time she was convicted and sentenced to 5 years in the Yuma Territorial Prison. Her partner Boot received a much harsher 30-year sentence. While in Yuma, Hart became something of a celebrity, entertaining visitors and reporters and embracing her outlaw fame. After serving about 18 months, she was pardoned on December 19, 1902, by the territorial governor. Some later speculated it was to avoid the embarrassment of a female prisoner becoming pregnant, though the details are uncertain. After her release, she briefly attempted to capitalize on her notoriety, possibly even performing in shows, but ultimately faded from the public eye, reportedly marrying a rancher named Calvin called Bywater and living quietly until her death decades later. Although Pearl Hart was not literally the last person ever to rob a stagecoach, carriages were held up later into the early 20th century. Her daring 1899 robbery remains one of the most famous and widely reported of the Old West era, especially as a female outlaw in what was otherwise an almost entirely male world of stage robberies. The so-called photograph of the missing pterodactyl is one of the most enduring and controversial legends of the American frontier, often cited as a mysterious artifact from the late 19th century that allegedly shows a gigantic flying reptile killed by cowboys in the American Southwest. The story does not originate from a single verified photograph, but from newspaper accounts, frontier folklore, and later sensational retellings, making it a fascinating example of how myth, journalism, and the Wild West imagination collided. The legend is most commonly linked to Tombstone, Arizona, in the 1890s, a region already famous for gunfights, lawlessness, and larger-than-life stories. According to the tale, 2 cowboys encountered an enormous winged creature while riding through the desert. The beast was described as hairless, leathery-skinned, with an elongated head and wings spanning over 20 feet, a description uncannily similar to a pterodactyl, a prehistoric reptile believed to have gone extinct over 65 million years ago. The cowboys allegedly shot the creature after a prolonged chase, killed it, and brought the body back to town, where it was photographed while being held up by several men to show its immense size. The earliest known printed version of this story appeared in 1890 in the Tombstone Epitaph, a real newspaper, though the original article has never been conclusively recovered. What survives instead are later references and reprints, claiming the photograph showed a winged monster stretched out against a barn wall, with armed men standing beneath it for scale. Over time, the image itself supposedly vanished, fueling speculation that it was deliberately destroyed, lost, or suppressed. In the decades that followed, the story resurfaced repeatedly in books, magazines, and paranormal research circles. Some claimed the photograph had been seen in private collections, old scrapbooks, or newspaper archives, while others insisted it never existed at all. Despite extensive searches through museum records, newspaper morgues, and historical societies, no authenticated photograph has ever been produced. This absence became the foundation of the myth's power, the idea of a lost image proving the impossible. Modern historians and paleontologists overwhelmingly agree that the story is a hoax or exaggerated frontier tall tale, likely inspired by the era's fascination with fossils, newly discovered dinosaur bones, and sensational journalism. During the late 19th century, newspapers frequently published fabricated or wildly embellished stories to boost circulation, and the American West was fertile ground for such myths. The image of cowboys standing over a slain monster fit perfectly into the cultural imagination of the time, man conquering the unknown. Scientific analysis further undermines the legend. A living pterodactyl could not have survived unnoticed into modern times, especially in the arid Southwest, and the anatomical descriptions given in the stories often conflict with real pterosaur biology. No physical remains, bones, or verified eyewitness accounts exist beyond anecdotal retellings. As a result, the missing pterodactyl photograph is now regarded as one of the most famous cryptozoological myths in American history, comparable to stories of thunderbirds or sea serpents. Yet despite being debunked, the legend endures. It represents a unique intersection of the Wild West, early mass media, and humanity's fascination with lost worlds and hidden truths. The idea that a single photograph, now vanished, could rewrite history continues to captivate audiences, making the photograph of the missing pterodactyl less a scientific mystery and more a symbol of how myths are born, spread, and preserved long after the frontier itself disappeared.